Please join me now in welcoming to the stage astronaut Jose Hernandez.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Muchas gracias. Thank you. Gracias. Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the video you just got through seeing. As a kid, I was pretty cute kid. But man, I looked at my middle school and high school years, and it was pretty horrendous pictures there. I always tell the kids when I give this talk and I show this video to the kids in middle school, and they don't like, because middle school, let's face it, it's the awkward years, right? And I always tell them, guys, there's hope for you. Age does something good for you, so there is hope for them. But I want to thank the Superintendent Tom Torrickson for inviting me here to the first annual California STEM Symposium. I think it's a very, very important symposium that we need to hold because it allows us to create a dialogue as to the importance of STEM education. And I know I'm preaching to the choir when I'm talking to you about STEM, but the one thing I do want to make sure that you take with you is the fact that every kid is worth investing in. And every kid is worth investing in. I show that video at the beginning for a reason. And that reason is, as you can see, I came from very humble beginnings. I came from a migrant farm working family. And very proud of that. And our routine was very typical of what a typical migrant farm working family did from the state of Michoacan. And that was that we used to spend 9 months in California and 3 months in Mexico. And during our trip here in California, we went to 3 or 4 different cities following the harvest, beginning in Southern California in Ontario, Chino, strawberry season, moving up to Salinas for the lettuce and hoeing sugar beets, coming up to Modesto, Stockton, Tracy. And after those 9 months, that whole process would repeat itself. But let me tell you a story about the fact that why teachers are so important in the lives of young kids. In this particular example, it was just a visit by my second grade teacher to our house. You see, every November, my dad would make the great announcement that we were going back to Mexico for 3 or 4 months, and to get homework from your teachers. And of course, we did this about a week before we left because the teachers needed time to put the homework together. And I'm the youngest of 4. So in this particular case, my dad gets up, makes that grand announcement, muchachos, nos vamos a México en la próxima semana. We go to Mexico next week. Get your 3 months worth of homework. So this was during our last stop, which was always in Stockton. And so I was going to Fillmore Elementary School, okay? And I remember we lived about 1.5 miles away. In those days, you can walk to school 1.5 miles away. Nowadays, we as parents get arrested for child endangerment. We make our kid walk 1.5 miles. But that's a different story. So that morning, I get up and I go running to school con el chisme, right? And I go and my teacher was Mrs. Young. You saw the class picture there. Mrs. Young was my second grade teacher. She was about 4 or 5 years out of college, very young, beautiful, tall. Well, tall relative to a second grader because la veo la pobre y está chaparrita. She's short. But she used to be tall when I was in second grade. And of course, young and beautiful. I'm in the second grade. Second grade teacher is always your first crush, right? So I go and tell Mrs. Young, I said, Mrs. Young, can you give us 3 months worth of homework? Can you give me 3 months worth of homework because we're going to Mexico? And she looks at me with this frustrated look. And she says, you know what, Jose? You tell your parents that I'm going to go to your house because I need to talk to your parents. So I said, okay. School was out. I voy corriendo, running with the chisme again to my parents' house. They come from work, and I tell my dad first, right? I don't even finish the sentence that the teacher's coming over when he's already taking out his belt. Because he's the type that he doles out the punishment first, then asks questions later. Yeah, that's him. Somehow I managed to convince him that it was related to our trip to Mexico because he didn't whip me. And then I go over to the kitchen to tell my mom. And my mom, I'm not sure if you guys seen that movie Home Alone, Macaulay Culkin look. That was her look. The teacher's coming. We got to sweep and mop, and we got to make sure we clean the house and make fresh tortillas and make a good dinner. Because us as Latinos have this great appreciation for educators. So that's a hint for you guys all. If you guys want to eat good, get yourself invited to a Latino household, and you guys will eat good. So that evening, Mrs. Young came over, and we had a great dinner. But then we sat down, and I remember this conversation vividly because I translated for my parents. My parents only have a third-grade education. At the time, they did not know how to speak English, and at the time, I was barely learning how to speak English. Nonetheless, I was a translator. And Mrs. Young sat down in the sofa with my parents and myself and just had a simple conversation with my parents. She just said, I'm just here because I'm concerned about your kids. My dad said, well, are they getting bad grades or are they behaving badly? And she said, no, contrary. I've had the pleasure of having all 4 of them. I said, but perhaps the best way I can explain my concern is to give you an example. And my dad said, okay. And she proceeded and said, imagine you had 4 trees and you nourished them, put fertilizer, took good care of them. But then you transplanted it, all 4 of them. But you keep nourishing them. And then you keep transplanting them. But you keep nourishing them. But you continue to do that throughout their life cycle. What happens to those trees? And my dad, the proud farm worker he is, knowledgeable about agriculture and plants, he said, well, that's easy, Mrs. Young. She says, the trees aren't going to die, but I will tell you this. The trees are going to stay small. You're going to stunt their growth. And if they're fruit trees, they're probably not going to bear any fruit. And she looked at him and she said, exactly. Those are your 4 kids. That's why you have to stop moving around, stay in one place to give your kids a chance for a good education. And it just took one visit from a teacher to change the course of a whole family. So if you as teachers think you're not making a difference, you think about this particular example, and I guarantee you there's been things you've done that you thought have been very insignificant that has had a profound effect on the kids you are teaching. So don't ever give up on a kid. Okay? And, you know, I have a lot of stories like that from teachers as I went from Fillmore to Fremont Junior High to Franklin High School in Stockton, California, because after that conversation, you know, we still went to Mexico, but on our way back, we did not make the normal stops. We started making Stockton our home. The visits to Mexico got shortened to 3 weeks centered around Christmas vacation. All of a sudden, our education started to get traction. And as a product of a public school system in Stockton Unified School District, you know, we had good teachers in that process. You know, there's teachers like Mr. David Ellis in junior high. One of the things that I excelled in, because English was hard for me at the beginning, my refuge was mathematics. And so when I got into junior high, we had exhausted all the courses that were available in junior high, and Mr. Ellis created a calculus course for about 4 of us students. He got permission from the principal to teach 4 kids calculus in the 9th grade when we were at Fremont Junior High. Mrs. Senora Bello, Silvia Bello, taught me the importance of embracing our culture, of growing up in a bicultural environment, and not being embarrassed about bringing tacos for lunch at the school. And Mr. Andres Rodriguez, Dr. Andres Rodriguez, University of the Pacific. I remember, I thought I was well prepared for the rigors of a engineering curriculum. After I graduated Franklin High School, went straight to University of the Pacific. And I remember the first semester, we took physics, I took Fortran, I took chemistry, and I took calculus, and the humanities. And man, was I getting my butt kicked. I'm telling you, I was getting my butt kicked, especially in physics. And I remember one day in the middle of the semester, Dr. Andres Rodriguez, my physics teacher, pulls me aside and just gave encouraging words. He said, "I know you can do it." It was at the time I was considering quitting, because I said, hey, maybe I don't have the stuff to be an engineer. But it's those type of things that I'm trying to, make sure you understand that if you think they're insignificant, they have a big impact on kids. And so you just remember that whenever you are down on yourself and you think you're not making a difference, because I am telling you here today that you are wrong. Everything you do makes a difference in the kids' education. And especially now that we have to focus, or we should focus, on STEM education. It behooves us that if this country is going to remain competitive, we have to engage every segment of society into the STEM curriculum. Else this country doesn't have a chance. And we have to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity, everybody gets exposed, and everybody has a choice to study in the STEM fields, because we know technology is what's going to push this country ahead and keep it number one, as it always has been. So we need to work together and make sure that we are pushing these STEM curriculums. I also want to put out a shout out for the different programs I participated during my public education. I was part of MESA. I was part of Upward Bound. I was part of TRIO. It's those type of programs that are necessary that we need to keep funding to keep these kids engaged, because that's what we need to do. A lot of people always ask me, okay, so you were a migrant farm worker. Mrs. Young finally convinced your father to stay in one place. How in the heck did you become an astronaut? Or how was that dream even conceived? And I'm here to tell you that, unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember the tail end of the Apollo program. That was 1972. The very last mission is what I remember. It was 1972, and whenever there was a moonwalk, of course, all programming got preempted, and everybody watched it on TV. all of the U.S., the whole world for that matter, even the Hernandez family. The only difference is, of course, we had an old TV, vacuum tube TV, black and white with rabbit ear antennas, and we had to get up and change the channel, right? It was black and white, and it was not a great picture. As a matter of fact, my dad always gave us what we call, you didn't want to sit next to my dad when you were watching TV, because he would give you what's called el codazo, the elbow. That was, his remote control was give the elbow and we changed the channel. That was it. And of course, I always ended up sitting next to him, and so I always got the codazo. And aside from being the official channel changer, I was also the official antenna adjuster. You guys remember those UHF antennas? Rabbit ear antennas, and whenever something important came on, my dad would tell me, go adjust the antenna. So I would grab it, and I would say, does that look good, Dad? And he would say, it looks perfect, son. And you let go, and it looked bad. I would grab it again, adjust it. Does that look good, Dad? Allí, mijo, déjale, ahí. Then I would let go, and it looked bad. Of course, I know why this happens now, because I'm an electrical engineer, but at the time I didn't know it. My dad, apparently smarter than I am, it only took him on the third try. When he saw me grab it the third time, he said, you stay there, son. So if you can imagine the whole family fat, dumb, and happy in front of the sofa while they're watching the moonwalk, and I'm on the side in a contortionist position trying to watch the moonwalk myself. I remember I would even tell my older siblings, hey, provide some relief here. And they would just make fun of me. They said, nah, Dad said you had to do it. I kid around with them now in the kitchen table with my parents, because we still have my parents and they're healthy. I kid around with my older brothers because I tell them, I think you guys could have been astronauts too. And my brother next to me, the one that's only 11 months older than me, he looks at me and puts this grin and said, now, what would make you say that? I said, well, remember when I was, I was 10 years old and I was holding the antenna for the moonwalk, Apollo 17? And then he puts this dumb grin on his face. Oh, yeah, I wouldn't help you adjust the antenna, right? I said, exactly. Had you helped me, I said, I was hanging on to it so long, I think it's through osmosis I got programmed to be an astronaut, during the moonwalk. That's how I got programmed. But anyway, I kid around with him on that. But I remember the family was gracious enough to let me let go of the antenna once they had their fill. Of course, no one would hold the antenna for me. I would adjust it the best I could. And I would sit right in front of the TV. And I would look at the two astronauts walking on the surface of the moon. I said, wow. And then I would go outside, and the moon was out. I would stare at it. I would come back inside and see the astronauts walking kind of like bunny rabbits, 1/6 the gravity of Earth. Walter Cronkite narrating it. It was just an amazing sight. At that moment, I said to myself, that's what I want to be. I want to be an astronaut. And you got to remember the times, 10-year-old migrant farm worker wanting to be an astronaut. But the best thing I did for myself, was to share that dream with my parents. Because I remember that evening as we were getting ready for bed, my dad was walking in front of me, I was walking behind him. And I was telling my dad, Dad, I know what I want to be when I grow up. He said, "Sí, mijo, ¿qué?" I said, I want to be an astronaut. Man, he kind of like stuttered step. Stopped, turned around and looked at me, put his hands on his waist, and said, you want to be what? I said, quiero ser astronauta. I want to be an astronaut. He looked at me, and he must have saw the determination of a 10-year-old boy, because he said, mijo, let's go to the kitchen. And you don't understand, in the kitchen, 3 things happen in my family. The food's prepared and we eat there. My mom, every day after school, makes us do our homework on the kitchen table while she makes tortillas and sopa and arroz. And third, that is where justice is doled out in our family. Well, we had already eaten dinner, and my homework was done. That only left one other thing, and I said, man, did I say something so out of line? I was really concerned as I walked into the kitchen. But my dad said, sit down, son. And I sat down in the same chair where I do my homework. And he says, in a challenging tone, you want to be what? I said, quiero ser astronauta. And then he says, why? And then I explained the fact that I saw the astronauts on the surface of the moon, that I went outside and saw the moon and couldn't believe that 250,000 miles away at that moment, we had humans on the surface of the moon, and that we were watching it live and hearing it live on TV. And that fascinated me, that's what I wanted to do. And then what he said next surprised me. Because as soon as I said that, he looked at me and he said, I think you can do it. My eyes got this wide. He said, as a matter of fact, he said, I'm going to give you a recipe. Simple 5-ingredient recipe. If you follow this recipe, I guarantee you can do it. And my eyes got even wider. At this point, I became a dry sponge ready to absorb everything my dad was about to tell me. He went on and said, the recipe is very simple, mijo. It's 5 ingredients. He said, first, identify what you want to be in life. What does Pepe want to do when he grows up? And I said, I want to be an astronaut. I figured, hey, 1 out of 5, I'm almost there. Second, he says, recognize how far you are. And I thought, and I said, this is the moment where you probably shouldn't say things like this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I thought to myself, I said, well, I can't be any further than I am now. We're farm workers. Instead of getting mad, he sort of laughed and said, I'm glad you realized that, son, because the third step's even more important. So the third step is you got to draw yourself a roadmap from where you understand where you're at, and given by your smart remark you do, to where you want to go. And try to outline every step of the way, because you're going to be tempted to skip steps. And you may get there, but you're not going to be well prepared. So the third ingredient, draw yourself a map, no shortcuts. I said, what's the fourth, Pops? He said, you're doing it already, son. You're getting yourself an education. You're getting good grades. He said, fifth and final, he said, you know that work ethic you put out there, out in the fields picking cucumbers in the weekends, and in the summer, tomatoes, grapes, cherries? I said, yeah. He says, you put that in your books. He pointed to my books. Said, you put that in your books. And when you graduate college, you put that in your job. Always, always deliver more than what people ask for. If you do that, son, you mix up those 5 ingredients, I guarantee you can be an astronaut. And I remember going to bed so happy that evening because I said, wow, my parents believe I can be an astronaut, ergo, I'm going to be an astronaut. That, my friends, is the power of empowerment. If you empower a child in believing he can achieve, believe me, he can achieve. Just need to set up the right environment for that individual. I think the only other ingredient I would add is perseverance. That's my own 6th ingredient in my dad's recipe. Perseverance, because I'm here to tell you that, I applied to the NASA astronaut program not once, not twice. NASA didn't reject me 3 times or 4 times. NASA rejected me 11 times. It wasn't until the 12th time that I finally got selected. And I learned about perseverance because the first 6 years, there's 2 types of perseverance. There's passive perseverance and there's active perseverance. The first 6 years, I had passive perseverance because I faithfully turned in my application. I had my engineering degree. I had my graduate engineering degree. I was working at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. And I said, man, they're bound to call me. Well, the first 6 years, guess what? They didn't. As a matter of fact, the letter I would get back from NASA was a form letter. It didn't even have my name. It just said, dear applicant. Unfortunately, there's so many people that apply that are qualified. We're not interested in you. In the short, they said, don't call us, we'll call you. Try again next year. And I did that for 6 years. I finally got tired, and I said, I got to do something different. So the best thing you can do is you study the competition. And what I did then is I said, okay, next time they select a group of astronauts, I asked myself the question, what is it that they have that I don't have? First time it was pretty easy. It was astronaut. Pilot. I wasn't a pilot. So guess what? On my way to going to work at Lawrence Livermore Lab every day from Stockton, I would drive off to Tracy Municipal Airport. I learned how to fly. I became a pilot. Another year, I saw that they were all scuba divers. I wasn't a scuba diver. Made sense to be a scuba diver. I mean, you're in a self-contained underwater breathing apparatus to be an astronaut. They determine you have the aptitude if you're a scuba diver. So I got my scuba diver rated certification, advanced scuba diver, scuba rescue, scuba master. I had all kinds of scuba certifications. I want to make sure NASA knew I knew how to scuba dive. And then there's getting ahead of the game. To this point, it's trying to emulate them, but then you want to get that edge. And my edge came, it just fell in my lap. I remember back then, it was when the new Russian Federation had just formed, and we were working in the nuclear non-proliferation arena, where we were working with the Russians to try to reduce the number of nuclear weapons that they had. At the same time, I heard an announcement on the radio that NASA and the equivalent of NASA in Russia, the Russian Space Agency, signed an agreement to build what was going to be the International Space Station. So it didn't take a rocket scientist, even though I was one, but it didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that we were going to be working up in space with the Russians. So when a job came up that no one wanted to go work in Siberia to help the Russians with their nuclear non-proliferation efforts, no one wanted to sign up because it's cold, long distance, long periods of time away from the family. I raised up my hand. I raised it not because I wanted to get to know the Siberian countryside. I raised it because I could then go to my boss once I got the job and tell my boss, hey, in order for me to do my job better, wouldn't it be a good idea if when I'm in town, I have a Russian instructor so I could learn the Russian language and do my job better in Russia? He thought that was the greatest idea. I said, yeah, I'll pay for that. Well, I did that for 5 years. And I did it not because, I did want to do my job better in Russia, but I did it because I wanted to make sure that NASA knew that I knew how to speak Russian, give me an edge since we were going to be working up with the Russians. And guess what? That worked. Now I was getting letters that say, Dear Dr. Hernandez. Oh, that was a big change now. But even so, I made it to the 100 finalists, and I still didn't get selected. The next selection round, I made it again to the 100 finalists, and I didn't get selected. It wasn't until the third time that I made it to the 100 finalists that I finally got selected. A lot of people always tell me, God, didn't you get tired of that? What kept you going? And I'll tell you, I looked at it from the positive side of things. I said, what's the worst that could happen if I'm trying all this to get selected as an astronaut? What's the worst that could happen? The worst that could happen is I have a stellar career as an engineer at Lawrence Livermore Lab. So not a shabby consolation prize. So I kept using that recipe, and I said I'm going to continue using it till the cows come home, or NASA selects me. And I guess NASA decided to select me before the cows came home. Because in 2004, I formed the 19th class of astronauts. In 2004, we became astronaut candidates. We trained for 2 years. 2006, we were eligible for flight assignment. We had technical jobs. And then in 2008 came my call on a flight assignment, STS-128, where we trained for 18 additional months. And then August 28th, I was selected as the flight engineer of the space mission STS-128 on Space Shuttle Discovery. That's the third in line to pilot the shuttle. And one of the two principal robotic arm operators. And we blasted off into space on August 28th. It was a midnight launch. It was a midnight launch, and let me tell you a little bit about the launch. You're going to see it right now, but I want to explain it to you because let me tell you, it's the best e-ticket ride Disneyland can ever hope for. You know, you're sitting there on the launch pad. There's 7 of us. There's 4 in the flight deck, 3 in the mid deck. The 4 in the flight deck are the ones that have the flight responsibilities. The 3 in the mid deck are basically a sack of potatoes at this point. Don't feel sorry for them though, because they're the ones that do the spacewalks. And then we're sitting there, and the countdown is continuing. At about 4 seconds, you're gonna see the 3 engines light up. Those are fed by the orange tank in the center. And then about 2 seconds later, you're going to see the 2 white solid rocket boosters light up. Once those light up, you can't turn them off, so you know you're going somewhere. And those solid rocket boosters are only on for 2.5 minutes. Then they pop off, fall in the ocean with parachutes, recovered because they're reusable. And the center tank keeps feeding the 3 engines for another 6 minutes. It's a total flight of only 8.5 minutes. You go from 0 miles an hour to 17,500 miles an hour in 8.5 minutes. And then once you're up there, you continue at that speed, but now you're rotating around the Earth, orbiting Earth, and it only takes 90 minutes to go around the Earth. So those of you that are good in math, our mission was 14 days, translates to 217 revolutions around the world. 5.7 million miles. I wish we had a freaking flyer program, but we don't. And if you don't mind, I'd like to show you the video right now because I think it's just an amazing trip that we took on August 28, 2009. That's our mission patch. And again, we get in about 3 hours before launch. At this point, we're seconds before launch. See the 3 engines?
Roger.
Solid rocket.
Houston Discovery, roll program. Roger, roll, Discovery. 3104, copy. Needles are centering up.
Less than 50.
Copy, Jose.
Or you can hear me give the milestones
Right.
to the commander.
103, Team Ecos.
And 8.5 minutes later, we are in space. You see me right behind the two pilots. I got the best seat in the house because it's panoramic. Give me the thumbs up because I'm a bona fide astronaut. Our mission was an international flight because we had Christer Fuglesang from Sweden. He's opening up the payload bay doors. There you see yours truly getting the onboard computers connected. They're going to help us dock to the International Space Station. And we put a psycho-ergometer, a stationary bike, to keep our leg muscles strong. There you see Nicole Stott. So those ladies wishing to be astronauts is certainly possible. I had a colleague of mine, engineer, Nicole Stott, who was one of our crewmates. This is the perspective of the astronauts on the station of us. Notice how we stop at 600 meters. We do a flip maneuver so they can look at our underbelly, which is our thermal protection system. Want to make sure it didn't get damaged on the way up. We then dock to the International Space Station at this point. So now we have two space vehicles that become one. We physically dock to the station. You see that cylinder there? We're carrying 7 tons of equipment in that cylinder.
All right.
Capture light?
Looking for free draft.
You never got the
Station
contact light.
in Houston.
And remember, once we're up there, we're continuously floating. So we don't use our legs for anything except another pair of hands.
Good job.
You see us celebrate the fact that we successfully docked to the station. That allows us to open up the hatch, access hatch. Now we got this neat little tunnel that connects us to the International Space Station. The crew, a crew of 6 is waiting for us. And they're happy to see us, not because we're good buds, but they've been up there for months, and they know we have fresh fruit and vegetables. So they even try to bribe us with T-shirts and everything. The commander at this point was Gennady Padalka, a Russian, so my Russian did come in handy. And then once we meet and do everything, we get to work. I was one of the 2 principal robotic arm operators. We take that cylinder out of the payload bay door, payload bay of the shuttle, connect it to the International Space Station, and we empty more than 7 tons of equipment that we delivered.
Thermal cover is open. You can egress the air.
We also conducted 3 spacewalks. We installed an ammonia tank and fixed a few other things, some cameras, external cameras. Here you see the spacewalkers get out and walk out in the surface of the structure of the station. Long distances, I used the robotic arm to take them from one place to the other. So I was their expensive taxi is what I called myself. After about 12 days being docked, we undocked. And now you can see the station from about 600 yards. And it's as big as a football field from the outside. Inside, as big as a 5-bedroom home. We start coming home now. Gravity starts taking hold. Remember, we took off as a rocket, converted it to a spaceship. Now it acts like an airplane on the way home. An unpowered airplane, because it's just a glider. Gravity is bringing us down. And we got to land it right the first time. There's no go-arounds. But as you can see, it just falls out of the sky in a controlled fashion. We got the aileron surfaces to control the vehicle. Line up with the runway. Weather was bad in Florida, so we landed at Edwards Air Force Base here in California. And then very important to bring the wheels down. And then once we land, marks the official end of a STS-128 space mission, 14-day mission. I just want to reiterate the fact that, the journey I got to coming here and being selected as an astronaut was not a journey I took alone. As a matter of fact, at the expense of putting a plug in for my book, I have a book written called Reaching for the Stars, and it's also in Spanish, El Cosechador de Estrellas, that describes this journey. But in that book, you're going to see, as I referred to here earlier, that it was as a result of a lot of folks helping me, a lot of folks pulling for me, including family, including educators. And don't you ever forget that you guys are a very integral part of a kid's upbringing. It's a partnership with the parents. It's a partnership with the student. It's a partnership with yourself. So don't ever, ever give up on a kid. Muchísimas gracias.